What's up, guys? How are we? We have loved hearing from y'all on Instagram. And don't forget, if you haven't already, go follow us on Instagram at exo.gospelgirls. We're so excited to get this podcast started. But first, Ashlyn, can you pray for us?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us all here safely today. I pray that you guide our words and our thoughts, and that we will glorify you in this conversation. We love you, and we thank you for everything you have done and everything you will do. Amen.
Welcome to Anxiety Part 2. Today's episode will be a little bit unique. We all picked at least one person to bring in the conversation and talk about their experiences with anxiety, just to show y'all that there's a lot of different ways that people can feel anxious and how God helps them through those situations.
So first, I'm going to talk about my friend, my best friend Anna. Actually, she started having anxiety whenever she was 5 years old, which really shocked me whenever I had a conversation with her. She was so young, and it really just broke my heart. So hers just really started whenever she was going to babysitters. She didn't like being alone. She felt like she was really disconnected, and she got bullied a little bit. So it just really broke my heart to hear that. And I think another person, Ashlyn maybe mentioned her person was really young too. And Ashlyn, if you don't mind to share that, just her experience being young and how she handled that.
So my friend shared with me that she actually doesn't recall the specific times, but as she has heard about herself as an elementary schooler, she now recognizes that there were a lot of signs of anxiety. And then she really realized it when she was in middle school, but she didn't feel like she had the opportunity or the words to be able to put a name to her anxiety until she was actually in high school.
Yeah, that's something Anna also mentioned. Like, Anna was, something she really stressed to me whenever she was talking about her anxiety and, like, how to get help with it was to not be afraid to go and get help. Like, she's like, just go. Like, it's not an embarrassing thing to do. Like, going and asking for help is so, like, it should be so natural for us. Lib, you have a friend that's a counselor, right? Did she, like, talk about if, like, people get anxious coming to talk to her or anything, like, on those ends or...
Yeah, she definitely mentioned a strong point that I think is associated with either going to counseling or just going to seek that initial bit of help. And that is just like a lot of people feel shame or they feel like maybe like this just isn't something that they're actually dealing with, or they haven't come to, I guess, the realization that anxiety is a part of them, and it's not something that they need to be like, oh, I need to hide this. In fact, the more they seek out and the more they go, the more help and the more they can kind of let go of all that.
Liv, I'm really glad you mentioned that because my cousin Kenzie was actually recently diagnosed with postpartum depression, but it actually took her a long time to reach out for help because of comments from different people making her feel like it wasn't normal. She definitely had to trust and be aware that it was real, but she continues to give God the glory.
Yeah, that's really good. I think something that we really need to stress here is, like, it is all of God's glory, and God's, like, going to help us overcome. Anna mentioned that, like, something she realized was that even though she felt alone during this time, she could always pray, and, like, she'd pray herself to sleep at night. She'd pray herself, like, going into school. Ashlyn or Bree or Lib, like, what are some other ways we think, like, that your person mentioned, like, help them, like, God helped them through their situation?
Abby mentioned a couple things, actually, and she also, on top of being a counselor, also struggles with anxiety personally, and I've actually got to walk through a lot of life where this kind of came to fruition, and she kind of really, the things caused her to have anxiety. But she mentioned a couple Bible verses and then also just seeking God. And I want to mention one of the Bible verses and kind of the thoughts that she had. And it was kind of brilliant. And I think Bree can kind of bounce off of this in a second too. But she mentioned Matthew 26:39. And this verse, just to read it to you, said, "And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And so this, if you don't have any background, is Jesus in the garden as he is getting ready to know that he is going to go and die and be crucified. And he was so stressed to the point where he was literally sweating blood. But that just kind of showed to her that, like, even Jesus in a moment was kind of anxious or kind of thinking about what was ahead, and it really caused him to even pause and be like, God, like, if there's any way that this can happen. And so she was able to relate to that and realize God or Jesus kind of dealt with something similar.
So what's funny, Liv, I don't think you knew this, but I actually had this conversation. I asked this question. I think I asked Taj or someone. I was like, did God or did Jesus ever have anxiety? And so I just really questioned that. So I'm really glad you brought that verse up. And it's just so, like, kind of comforting to know, like, hey, I'm not alone in this.
I love that y'all mentioned that because Christina, my other cousin, also brought that same situation up with Jesus. And she had to recognize that anxiety isn't always because of a sin. In fact, it often isn't. Jesus, again, was also anxious when he went to the garden, but it obviously wasn't a sin issue. He fully trusted his Father, but he was aware of what was to come. So I think that's really cool that y'all also brought that up, and Abby brought that up as well.
I guess just to keep going with other things that we use to cope, something else was taking self-care and taking time to really just be alone and be with yourself. And this was something that was kind of brilliant, I guess I thought, because not a lot of us, I know, in busy life, we don't take time to just pause and sit and kind of realize what is happening and then realize these moments where we can turn things over to God, because we just are so busy that we almost sit in these ideas and then we don't turn it over to God. And so it was really nice. And she even used the thought of, like, she usually may even double or, like, take even extra time on her self-care. And she threw in here, sometimes, like, she'll do a little dance party alone, or she'll paint, or just do, like, something so simple, but something that allows her to have time alone and then have time with God as well in those moments.
One thing that I wanted to mention here when you were talking about kind of being still and taking some time, and I know Ashlyn actually mentioned this in last episode about it's a certain exercise that helps our minds get out of these anxious thoughts and kind of calm ourselves down. It's called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we think about 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. You can do this in any order, like 1 through 5 or 5 through 1. But the point is getting your brain to refocus on the present so it gets out of the anxiety fog. And I just really like that method because I think it can help us get out of the situation. And I love that Christina mentioned that to me because I know Ashlyn had mentioned it last week but didn't get to expand on it.
Yeah, my friend also brought up that one again. Something different that I do a little bit with that one, though, is on the number 1, I actually do one thing that I like about myself. So when you're like, there's certain situations where you're feeling kind of overwhelmed with yourself even, to just be able to pause and say, I like my hair today, or my outfit's really cute today, or anything simple like that, just to be able to remind yourself that you're here and you're doing good. But my friend also said that she does a exercise. I've actually seen this on a Grey's Anatomy episode, but she does an okay sign, and then you tap each thumb to each finger as you're breathing deeply and trying to, like, remain calm, and it helps her stop and remind herself to stop shaking, and it gives her hands something to do so that she's not biting her nails, she said. But I think those exercises are both really cool and can definitely be helpful.
Yeah, Ashlyn, so I want to go back to whenever you're talking about the last thing, the number 1, to, like, the one thing you like about yourself. So Anna talked about whenever she was younger, she always just that loneliness feeling, and she felt like she got really bullied at school. And so one thing that I think she really noticed, as she told me whenever we were talking, was she realized that she is God's, and she doesn't have to be, like, she doesn't have to be a certain person for anybody else. She doesn't need to be another person. She doesn't need to look a certain way. She doesn't need to smile a certain way. Like, she doesn't have to fit in with the crowd. She is her own person, and God accepts her that way. So I really think pointing out to yourself, hey, this one thing that I really like about myself is something that God has blessed me with, and God's given me, like, he's just blessed me so much.
Something else that my friend said, like, just to encourage yourself, is when you are feeling anxious, maybe about the small things like talking on the phone to someone, because I know that I struggle with that a lot, is practicing over and over what I'm going to say when I call someone. If you're struggling with something like that, being able to overcome it and do it is so rewarding. So to be able to remind yourself of all the little things that you felt anxious about and that you've been able to overcome, because the Lord has been there by your side and helped you through it is just amazing, and another way to be able to remind yourself that you will get through this anxiousness.
Katie, kind of a verse to bounce off something about you said from Anna, and her not feeling like she needs to be enough for someone else, but that God is the only one that she needs in her life. Deuteronomy 31:8, the Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. This just goes to show that God is the only one that we need to rely on and look to, especially in times of distress. And I just think that's really important to remember. I even from Matthew 14:22-33, Kinsey brought this up. Peter walked on water with Jesus. Jesus came to help them in the storm, and he comes to us in our deep waters and tells us to keep our eyes on him. Peter wasn't looking at him, he was looking at his circumstances, and this is when he started to sink. When we focus on our circumstances, we start to sink, but if we focus on eyes on him, he holds us up. And I just really, really loved that verse and that story that she mentioned.
I wanted to bring up a verse that my friend mentioned because it kind of relates to that verse. Isaiah 43:2 is just a reminder that when things feel overwhelming, God is with you in the deep waters. And I'm just going to read that. It says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. And that's just really important to remember, that sometimes the problem or the anxiety isn't as deep as it seems. And there's a promise that it won't overtake us, which is what my friend said to me. And that's just so important and crazy to think about.
Yeah, that was awesome. I really loved how y'all mentioned that and just brought all that together. One thing we also I talked about this with a completely different friend, just kind of going off of what Bree said and how some of our, we're looking at, what worries us instead of, looking to God. Something she said that I really loved was, it's such a mindset that we have to wake up and do every single morning. It's a mindset of, are you going to let God handle it, or are you going to take it upon yourself? And it's just, it's really, kind of also got off of the 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. It's finding even, the smallest things that make you happy. If it's watching a show or anything. It's just such a mindset of, are you going to rejoice in it, or are you going to worry about it?
One piece of advice that Kinsey gave is just using every opportunity to rely on the Lord other than ourselves, which I know you mentioned that. But again, asking yourself, are you trying to please others rather than God? Am I focusing on the Lord or the circumstances? We definitely still have to deal with whatever circumstances that is causing us anxiety or making us anxious. But again, we can't dwell on them, and we have to remember that we do have the Lord to rely on. So I think that's really good.
To bounce off of that, Philippians 4:6-7, which I know this is just a big verse, and a couple of us, even when we were sitting here earlier, were we have this verse, and it was all in common. But just to say it, and then I want to focus on the end piece because it really bounces off of what everybody's just been saying. But it says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I guess the kind of thought about turning it over to God every morning or turning it over to God every day, which is something so huge and something that our friends struggle with and we struggle with personally, but it's guarding your hearts and minds and that idea of putting them towards Christ always. So letting our thoughts be towards Christ, letting our hearts be towards Christ, letting all those lies and all those little things that kind of creep in throughout the day that either give us anxiety or worries or whatever, letting them be towards God instead of letting them be in us. And so that was kind of a really cool point. And Abby also was the one who actually sent me this verse, and she kind of says the same thing of just giving it to God and letting him have it through that, of letting our thoughts always be towards him, because it creeps in less.
Yeah, so I know last episode we mentioned journaling, and Brie, I think you have another point on this, but something that I also talked about with Anna was talking it out. But instead of talking out with a friend, just sitting and pretending that God is right there with you. Because I know, he's not physically there, but he is he's right there with you completely. And so I think even if you're talking out loud and you might look a little crazy talking to yourself, it's okay, because you have to get it out. You can't hold that in. Absolutely. So not only can you talk out loud, but Bree, can you share that journaling idea that you had?
Yes, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because when Kinsey mentioned this to me, I got really excited, because I feel like a lot of girls our age can use this and also use it to witness in the sense. She said that she is creating a battle journal. She's heard of battle cards before, but this journal is literally a journal full of verses fully written out, not just references, that she can quickly look back on when she's feeling anxious or in spiritual warfare. It is all battling against the devil, and it's good to have those verses to literally say, "Get away, devil." And I know Katie mentioned that last week, how she literally just screams at the devil sometimes, telling him to get away. So I just really like this journaling idea, just to kind of collect a bunch of verses in one little journal that you could throw in your purse or throw in your backpack. That way, if you're ever struggling or a friend is struggling, you can even pull this out and show it to them. And I just really love that idea.
Okay, so I'm also going to mention, so not only can we use, like, Bible verses and stuff, but I also, like, know this song. I think I've shared it with Ashlyn. I've shared it with a few others. It's called Peace Be Still, and there's just this one line in there that says, it's kind of going off of walking through deep waters and stuff, and how we don't want to look at the worries of the world, but it says, "Peace be still, you are here, so it is well. Even when my eyes can't see, I will trust the voice that speaks." And that's just so, like, comforting and relieving to me, knowing that, like, I'm in these deep waters and I can't see anything. Like, anxiety is just filling me, but it's not about looking down. It's about looking up and knowing that God is right there, and that his voice is going to speak to you and he's going to lead you through it all.
I love that thought. And something, I guess, to kind of, not backtrack for a second, but kind of backtrack for a second. Something Bree mentioned was even, like, helping others. And something Abby, my friend, said, because I asked her the question of kind of, you know, if you don't struggle with anxiety yourself, because there are some people, I'm sure, who are listening who maybe you don't relate to this whole kind of topic or idea that we've had, or just anxiety, or you know people who have it, but you're like, I don't personally relate. And so she gave her kind of thought on that from a counseling perspective, and then just from someone personally who struggles. And she said, you know, the best way is just to be there, or just to let them know that you're there, but not try to be the one to fix it. So the kind of idea that kind of made me think of it when Bree was talking was, you know, maybe if you don't struggle yourself, but you maybe know people who do, whatever, even filling up a battle journal for you. Maybe you know someone who struggles, but they weren't willing to do it for themselves, or they're not to that point yet to do it for themselves. You could still do it, and that's another way you can support them and be there for them. Because, you know, sometimes if you don't struggle with it yourself, you don't really know how to give the advice or give points to kind of be like, well, this is what is happening or whatever. But that would be such a cool way to still be in tune and still be able to be supportive and be there for those friends. So if you don't struggle, there's still such a way, and this podcast can still help you, you know, understand more, and you can still be very involved with those friends.
That's something else that Anna mentioned, and actually Anna's the one that helped me through my panic attack, and something that we do together is we breathe with the person. So just being there and being that comfort for them, and just really taking them through the slow breaths of in through your nose and out through your mouth.
And you can also, like, I mean, even, like, you could remind them of, like, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that we talked about, or just, like, be, you know, talk through them with it. Or sometimes people literally just need you to sit there with them. Like, I'm one of those people, I know I mentioned in the last podcast, who doesn't like to talk, who doesn't like to talk it out in the moment, but just to, like, sit there with them, or just to be there, kind of letting them know that you're that supportive person.
Kinsey, my cousin again, one person that's helped her a lot through her anxiety is her husband. And I'm not sure much. I haven't talked to him much about if he deals with anxiety, but he has helped her a lot through hers. And one thing he always asks her when she's struggling is kind of what is the worst possible thing that could happen. So she does have a son, and he's 2. So they are currently trying to potty train him. So one thing he asks her is what's the worst possible thing that could happen. And obviously for him, it's, you know, he'd pee his pants, and then they take care of it. So kind of asking yourself that question, because maybe you're anxious about school or work or a test or whatever. But again, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? And for the test, you could fail it, and, you know, you'll try again next time. You'll do better next time. So I really like that as well.
I'm going to ask one, I'm going to talk one more time at least, and ask, did any of y'all's people mention, like, how they felt before their panic or anxiety attack? And maybe Lib, in a little bit, you can mention, like, the difference between it.
absolutely.
Because something that Anna mentioned that I thought was like a really good description, especially being in the South over here, is she said that she feels like she's a deer in the headlights during her time. And like, it's just like she's stuck. So I don't know if anybody else felt that way, but I think definitely the comforting feeling will help her in that
Yeah.
situation. So if your friend just feels stuck and is just crying and shaking all that stuff, definitely think that comfort will help. Anybody else, Ashlyn?
My friend actually said that sometimes it depends on the situation. So there could be a whole day or a long period of time that her heart feels like it's racing and her chest feels tight, like it's hard to take a deep breath, and she has trouble focusing. But she said her more direct attacks are basically more intense and emotional and not as long. And she didn't recognize them as anxiety attacks for a long time because she just kind of passed it off as being emotional, even if the situation had nothing to do with her emotions, which I think I relate to so much because I am an emotional person in general. So when I was feeling anxiety and didn't really know that it was anxiety yet, I was just like, oh, I'm having a hard day, I'm very emotional. But in reality, it was being overwhelmed with emotions because of anxiety.
Kind of trailing off that for a second and going back to kind of what Abby said in a counseling perspective. And I thought it's kind of blew my mind, I guess, because I'd never thought about the panic attack and anxiety attack and the differences between. And so I'm going to quote her so I don't mess up what she said because she said it so well. So she started out by saying how important it is to differentiate between like the panic attacks and the anxiety attacks. And she said, anxiety attacks are much like panic attacks, but they are caused by anxiety. So there is a definite cause, and you can tell where it came from most of the time. So, like, you know that there's something coming up or something in life. Or, like, I know it's mentioned that Kinsey, she had postpartum, and so with her kid, you know, that's something that's a big anxiety piece for her. And so she can kind of know, you know, sometimes, or if we have a test or we have something coming up. But then she said panic attacks are definitely more clinical and happen without the stimulus being present. So those are kind of things that just, you could be having a great day and then all of a sudden, you know, this comes on. And I think to go what Katie said or Anna said, it's much like you're being stuck, or she described it as like you're having a heart attack. Like you just don't know what's happening. And you're definitely frozen there in that moment. And Abby even said personally, like she'll even sometimes disassociate. And so that's where she brought back in those techniques of, you know, seeing what's around her in the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But that was kind of a, I guess, interesting point because I had not heard it put that way before. But whether like that's you and you struggle with that and you're trying to figure out like which one is which. Now I'm not here to diagnose anyone. I'm not a professional. This was just kind of what she was giving me in those moments. But if you're just a friend who's trying to help out, you know, those may be some really good points to kind of know, because we do have these things that happen. And so trying to bring them back down, and also then returning, pointing them, you know, praying with them, talking with them, whatever else you need to do in those moments.
Yeah, I really like how you said praying with them. I think that's a really big thing, just to direct it all back to God and like how God can help us overcome everything.
I love when I was talking to Kinsey, actually, one thing that she did not stop saying is giving God all the glory over and over again. It came up when she was talking about the people who have helped her through her anxiety. Like her husband and all of her family and friends obviously have helped her through those times of struggle, but God is the one who put those people into her life. But I swear she said it like more than 20 times. So I just really love that she kept going back to God in all of her anxiousness.
Yeah, I think that's so important. It's just remembering that like we aren't alone, and like through it all, God is gonna be right there. God's the ultimate one that's gonna have the victory in all of it, because he's the one in control. He's the one that sees the future. So he's definitely the one in charge of all of our anxieties.
Everything we're going through is all about him showing his love for us and drawing us closer to him. And just being thankful for him. But literally everything is pointing back to him.
So, again, we just want to wrap up by saying you're so loved, and you're heard and you're seen, especially by the creator of the whole entire world. And just don't be afraid to reach out to him. Just cry for him for help. He's going to always be right there by your side. And as always, anyone around you. So we are praying for you. We love you all. Be safe and don't forget God's in control.
XOXO Gospel Girls.